There's a moment that happens in certain episodes of All in the Family where you can actually feel the shift, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in something quieter, something almost invisible at first, where a normal conversation just stops being a conversation, and without anyone announcing it, without anyone deciding it out loud, it turns into something else entirely, something sharper, something more rigid, something that feels less like talking and more like standing your ground. And that slow transformation, that gradual slide from discussion into confrontation, is where the show finds some of its most powerful and honestly most uncomfortable comedy. It usually begins in such an ordinary way that you almost don't notice anything special about it. Just the familiar living room, the same worn chair, the same rhythm of people moving in and out, carrying something from the kitchen, Gloria sitting nearby, Mike already there, maybe reading or just waiting, and Archie entering with that particular kind of energy he has, not necessarily angry, not yet, but already carrying opinions, already carrying something he's ready to say. And at first, it really does feel like a conversation, like something that could stay light, something that could remain within the safe boundaries of disagreement without turning into conflict. Because the show gives you that space, it lets the characters ease into it, lets them exchange ideas in a way that almost feels normal. Archie says something, maybe about the way things are changing, maybe about something he heard or saw, something that challenges his sense of how the world is supposed to work. And Mike responds, calmly, thoughtfully, offering a different perspective, not aggressively, not just explaining, just adding another angle. And for a moment, it works. There's a rhythm there, a kind of balance, where each person is speaking and listening in turn, where the conversation feels like it could go somewhere, like it might actually lead to understanding. Gloria listens closely, her attention moving between them, already aware of the tension that could build. And with that gentle presence, adds small comments that soften the edges, that keep the tone from tipping too far. But then something changes, and it's rarely one big moment. It's usually something small, a word, a tone, a slight shift in how something is said. And suddenly, the conversation isn't quite as open as it was a moment ago. Archie's responses become a little firmer, a little less curious and a little more certain, and Mike's replies begin to carry more emphasis, more insistence, not because he wants to argue, but because he can feel the resistance forming. And this is where the transformation really begins, where the conversation starts to lose its flexibility, where each response becomes less about engaging with the other person and more about reinforcing a position. It's subtle at first, easy to miss if you're not paying attention, but the show lets you feel it, lets it unfold slowly, lets you sit inside that shift as it happens. Archie leans more into his worldview, into the ideas that define how he sees things, and those ideas aren't just opinions. They're tied to his identity, to his sense of stability, to his understanding of the world. And that's why they're so difficult for him to question. Mike, on the other hand, leans into his own beliefs, his own confidence in change, in progress, in questioning tradition. And while his approach is more measured, more reasoned, it also becomes more fixed as the conversation intensifies. Gloria tries to step in to bridge the gap, to remind them that they're talking about more than just ideas, that there's a relationship at stake, that there's something personal underneath all of this. But even she starts to feel the shift, starts to feel the conversation slipping away from her. It continues to offer kindness, to bring warmth into the room, and for brief moments, it seems like that might be enough, like her presence might soften things, might slow the escalation. But the momentum has already begun to build. And once that momentum is there, it's incredibly difficult to stop, because the conversation is no longer about understanding. It's about being heard, about being right, about not backing down. That's when it becomes confrontation, not in a loud, explosive sense, although voices do rise, but in a deeper way, where each person is no longer trying to connect. They're trying to defend, trying to hold onto their ground. The living room becomes something different in those moments, not just a setting, but a kind of arena, a contained space where these ideas clash, where there's no escape from the tension, no easy way to step out and reset. You can feel the weight of the room, the way it holds the conflict, the way it amplifies every word, every pause, every reaction, and that's part of what makes the show so effective, the way it uses that space to intensify everything. And what's interesting is that the humor doesn't disappear when the confrontation takes over. It just changes. It becomes more uncomfortable, more reflective, more rooted in the absurdity of how people behave when they're locked into their positions. There are moments where the arguments loop, where the same points are made again and again, where no one is really listening anymore. And that repetition becomes funny in a way that's almost painful because it feels so real. It's not about clever lines or quick jokes. It's about recognition, about seeing something familiar in the way these characters interact, in the way they struggle to move beyond their own perspectives. Archie's worldview drives so much of this, not just because of what he believes, but because of how he holds onto those beliefs, how they shape his reactions, how they make it difficult for him to even consider that he might be wrong. And yet there's something human in that, something that goes beyond the surface, because underneath that rigidity there's often something else, something quieter, something that isn't expressed directly. Mike challenges those ideas, pushes against them, tries to open them up, and in doing so he becomes part of the confrontation as well, because his insistence, his determination to make his point, contributes to the tension. Gloria feels caught in the middle, her attempts to mediate becoming more urgent as the conversation escalates, and remains the emotional center, the one who reminds you that there's still care here, still connection, even if it's buried under the conflict. And when you think about the time this show was made, the early 1970s, it makes sense that these conversations felt so charged, because society itself was going through similar tensions, similar confrontations, similar struggles to reconcile different ways of thinking. The show didn't shy away from that, it leaned into it. It brought those conversations into the living room, into a space that felt personal, intimate, unavoidable. And that's part of why it was so groundbreaking, because it trusted the audience to sit with that discomfort, to engage with it, to laugh at it even as it felt uneasy. As the confrontation continues, there's a point where it almost feels like it can't go any further, like everything that can be said has been said, and yet the tension remains because nothing has actually been resolved. That's another key part of the show's approach, the way it allows things to remain unresolved, the way it resists the urge to tidy everything up, to force a moment of understanding that doesn't feel earned. Instead, it lets the conversation run its course, lets the confrontation settle into a kind of quiet, where the energy fades not because the issue is resolved, but because the characters are simply exhausted. And in that quiet, there's something reflective, something that lingers, something that stays with you after the scene ends. Personally, I find that to be one of the most compelling aspects of All in the Family, the way it captures these moments without simplifying them, without turning them into easy lessons. It shows how quickly conversation can become confrontation, how easily people can slip into defending their positions rather than exploring them, how difficult it can be to step back once that shift has happened. And even now, watching it feels relevant because those dynamics haven't changed. People still have these kinds of interactions, still struggle with the same patterns, the same tensions. As the episode winds down, the characters move on, the living room returns to its usual rhythm. But there's a sense that something has been left behind, not resolved, not fully addressed, just there. And that's where the show leaves you, not with answers, not with a clear conclusion, but with that feeling, that awareness of how these conversations unfold, how they change, how they become something else entirely. So you sit with it for a moment, maybe longer, thinking about how it started, how it shifted, how it ended without really ending. And there's something quietly powerful in that, something that stays with you even after the scene fades.